You've probably heard about tiny homes. For a lot of people, they're this amazing symbol of a simpler, more affordable way to live. But what if I told you that the very organization that certifies many of these homes is also working behind the scenes to limit where you can actually live in them? Yeah, today we're diving into a really strange paradox that gets to the very heart of what we call home and who gets to make the rules.
I mean, just look at this. This is the dream, right? Financial freedom, a smaller footprint on the planet, a life that's more about experiences than just stuff. And tiny homes on wheels, specifically, they promise this incredible kind of mobility and independence. It's a really powerful idea, especially when you look at how insane the cost of traditional housing has gotten. Okay, but here's where that beautiful dream starts to get a little complicated. Imagine you do everything right. You get a safety certification for your brand new tiny home, you're all excited, only to find out the group that gave you that seal of approval is also fighting to stop you from living in it full time. That's the paradox we're digging into, and it all revolves around one key organization.
And that organization is the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association, or the RVIA. To really get our heads around this contradiction, we first have to understand why a tiny house is even considered an RV in the first place.
It pretty much all comes down to the wheels. Because so many tiny homes are built on a chassis, they often get classified as recreational vehicles. So manufacturers build them to meet RV safety standards and get them certified with that little RVIA seal you see on campers. You know, for a builder, this gives them a clear set of rules to follow. And for a buyer, it gives you a sense of safety and legitimacy. But this is right where the two paths start to split.
So what's the RVIA's side of all this? Well, from their point of view, their role is crystal clear, and they've been very public about it. Let's take a look at their official position.
The RVIA frames this whole issue really specifically. They say their main job is to protect their members, the people who build traditional RVs, by making sure RVs stay strictly defined as vehicles. So in their mind, their job is to uphold the standards for temporary recreational products, not to accidentally create a new category of permanent housing.
And they take it even a step further. They use some pretty strong language, warning against what they call co-opting their vehicle standards for something they were never designed for, permanent homes. They're essentially arguing that taking a safety code for a vacation vehicle and applying it to a full-time house is just a complete misuse of the standard.
And this slide right here lays out their whole argument perfectly. On the left, you've got an RV. It's for temporary recreational use built to a national vehicle standard. On the right, you have a permanent home for full-time living governed by local housing and building codes. To the RVIA, these two worlds are and should remain completely separate. But it turns out a major federal agency sees that dividing line a little differently.
So now, let's bring in a new player, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Back in 2018, they issued a ruling that really clarifies this whole debate, and they drew a very, very clear line in the sand.
This all centers on something called the HUD RV exemption. Now, it sounds kind of bureaucratic, but its purpose was simple: to clearly define what is and what is not a manufactured home that falls under HUD's federal regulations. Basically, they wanted to make sure they weren't accidentally regulating RVs as if they were permanent houses.
And this is where HUD's final rule gets right to the heart of our story. The agency drew a super bright line, saying its authority is focused on just one thing: how the vehicle is manufactured. They made it incredibly clear that what happens after it's sold, how the owner actually uses it, well, that's a whole different story.
I mean, this quote says it all. HUD explicitly states that regulating how you use an RV, whether that's for a weekend camping trip or as your full-time home, is up to state and local governments. The federal government regulates the build, your local town regulates the use. This distinction is absolutely everything.
Okay, so we have the RVI's position on one side, and we have HUD's official ruling on the other. So now let's connect the dots and see exactly where the conflict really sparks.
Let's just walk through the logic here. Step 1. The RVIA certifies these tiny homes as RVs, which they themselves define as temporary vehicles. Step 2. HUD, the top federal housing authority, says that regulating how these are used is a job for states and local towns. But then, and this is the kicker, we get to Step 3. The RVIA actively lobbies at the state level to prevent these very same vehicles from being used as permanent homes. And this brings us right to the central argument. The accusation is that by lobbying against the permanent use of tiny homes, the RVIA is stepping way beyond its mission of protecting manufacturing standards and is wading deep into local housing policy, the very territory that HUD said belongs to local governments.
So you might be thinking,
Okay, this is an interesting regulatory fight, but why does it matter to me? Well, it matters because the outcome of this has some really big implications for all of us.
This fight directly impacts whether people can legally own and live in tiny homes, which so many see as a critical solution to the affordable housing crisis. It also brings up these huge questions about who gets to decide housing policy. Should it be a national industry group or your local town council? And ultimately, it forces us to ask a very modern question. In a world with new challenges, what exactly is a home, and who gets to define it?
So what we have is a debate that pits industry standards against housing innovation and federal rules against local needs. And as those lines between a vehicle and a home keep getting blurrier, the question of who holds the power to define what a home is and where you can put it is only going to get more urgent. So the real question is, who do you think should have the final say?